Hello and welcome to the video. This is another video aimed at all those of you that are relatively new fixed-wing pilots or who are looking to get into fixed-wing and currently flying quadcopters. Now, I've done a couple of videos talking about the options for everybody in the hobby and the broader hobby for those of you that may be coming to it through quadcopters. And there's a couple of things that I do before I fly with any fixed-wing model, and all those pre-flight checks have saved me from a lot of heartache. The majority of the crashes that I tend to see, an awful lot of them could have been avoided by doing pretty standard pre-flight checks, taking off with a battery that isn't fully charged, forgetting to change it out, doing things like accidentally managing to connect to the model and you're using the wrong model memory. Even though we have lots of fail-safes against that, it can occasionally happen. So in this video, I want to cover what I do, because I've also had a couple of questions from people wondering what I'm up to when I'm wiggling the sticks before I take off in one of my review videos, and I'm doing the last of my pre-flight checks and you're catching it on camera, and lots of people are asking what's that all about. And that's actually something called the high five check. I didn't invent that. That actually came from Flight Test back in the day where they used to make lots of really good videos, and I learned a lot coming back into fixed wing watching that stuff, and there was a ton of common sense. So I'm making this video to cover all of that, so it's a little bit more up to date for all of you out there watching the video, and hopefully it will allow you to avoid a crash or two. But before I get into what the high five is and how it works, it's worthwhile just talking about a few standard things that I do with every model before I take it out and fly it. And invariably I've seen people come a cropper by not doing one or a couple of these things before a flight. First thing I always do is make sure that the prop nut and the prop adapter and the prop itself are nice and tight. Occasionally things can work loose, and if the prop starts spinning and the motor is turning in the opposite way to the thread, the prop nut and everything will just spin off and disappear, and then your craft will be left without any power, and then you're in dead stick territory and you've got to try and bring it in without any prop. While you're doing that, I also check the prop for damage too. If you have any concerns about the prop at all, just change it out. It's not worth risking your model for the sake of a prop. Second thing to do is go over the model, check all the linkages and control connections are nice and firm. Check that all the servo horns aren't coming out, check all the connections into them are nice and secure, and make sure that all of the control surfaces are nice and tight too. A lot of these times they're actually connected to the control rod with a piece of plastic either embedded in it or attached to a piece of plastic that's stuck to the bottom of a piece of foam, and those can come undone. Also, if there are hinges in there, double check the hinges are okay. If it's just a foam hinge, over time those do wear out and they do start to separate. Obviously check that the battery is fully charged and you're not going to pop a partially charged battery into a model. I have a friend of mine, this is his classic trick. He keeps doing this and then finding that he has no power in the middle of a flight. And also make sure that if you're using timers on your radio, they're all reset and that they're set to automatically start when you throttle up, so you don't have to remember to start those too. That way, if you get completely engrossed in the flight and lose track of time, then at least the radio's keeping a track of it for you and will let you know when it's time to come in. And you don't end up having the receiver fail safe and getting into some really sticky situations. Do check that central gravity is where it should be and the battery is secure. Batteries moving in flight and drastically changing the central gravity can make a flight very interesting very quickly, particularly if they slide backwards when you may be doing a loop and then suddenly you've got a tail heavy plane and then you're in a world of hurt. Last thing on this list before we get to high five, do check the failsafe works. I would normally power up the model, just get the motor spinning slowly and then turn off the radio. You should find that the throttle stops and all the control surfaces return back to their normal position. I'll put a link in the description where I talk about how you set all those things up. I have a simple and a complex plane setup video that go through each of the steps, but you absolutely want to make sure that if something weird happens with the receiver or the radio connection, that the plane just doesn't continue flying on and disappears out of your life forever. And that brings me on to the last test, which is something that I find myself doing almost subconsciously these days, and that is the high five. Now what the high five is just a way to move the controls on the radio. The radio here is a mode 2 radio, so throttle and rudder is on the left hand side, elevator and aileron are on the right hand side, the right hand stick. What you do is you move each of the controls in turn and you should see the control surface rise to meet that stick. So as you move the aileron left and right, you should see that the corresponding aileron on the controls on the aircraft will move in tandem. Similarly, when you move on to the elevator, as you pull the elevator control down towards you in the same direction as the tail on the model on the ground, you should again see that control surface rise to meet that stick. And the last one is the rudder. As you take it left and right, you should see the rudder moving in the same direction. And that's something that I do before every single flight. It does a couple of things. One, it confirms all the control surfaces are free and clear and they can move okay. It also checks that the control surfaces are moving in the right direction and just confirms back to me that I have got everything set up properly. With a wing, it's even easier. We've only got two control surfaces to think about, so you're only really checking the elevator and aileron, and it's exactly the same. As you move the aileron from left to right, you should see the control surface that corresponds to the direction you're pushing the stick in pop up, and similarly when you move the stick down for the elevator, you should see all the elevators come up. Now that seems a little bit counterintuitive for the elevator, but the way I tend to do it, I just wiggle the stick around in a circle and it feels like all the control surfaces are rising to meet that control for the elevator and aileron, and the rudder's a very quick check just to make sure that it's exactly the same direction as the control too. So if you go through all of those checks, you should find that the majority of the hiccups that will cause you to have a problem and crash will be taken care of. The only last thing I'd say is if you go to an area where you've never flown before, one last thing that's handy as well as checking the model with this is before you fly is just doing a quick range check on your radio. Most radios have an ability to reduce the amount of power that they send out. Get a flying buddy to wander over to the far side of the flying field that you're in and just confirm with that lower power setting you still have good control of the model, and that's a handy thing to do if you're going into somewhere where you haven't flown before. But it can be good practice to do it now and again in areas that you've flown a lot in that you've never had problems with too. If you found that video useful or like the content, then please hit the like and subscribe button down below. If you want to go the extra step, you can become a Patreon of the Painless 360 channel and help provide support for what I do here. All the videos created here are put into playlists, so if you're interested in a particular topic, have a look at the playlist, and they all are organised in there to make them easier to use. If you're not sure if there's a video for your particular problem or topic you want to know more about, then add Painless 360 to the Google search term that you're interested in, and that should find the video, article or content about the particular thing that you're interested in having a look at.